I briefly touched on the leaked Home Office report yesterday about how they intend to expand their definition of extremism. The government is saying they're not going to do that, but if you look into it, that's exactly what they're trying to do. They're trying to make Hindu nationalism seem like extremism, same with the manosphere, and so on. And this really is quite alarming when you read it all. We are slipping in, if not already, into liberal tyranny at this point. And I wanted to make a video, while I'm still allowed, to explore why this was always going to happen in this liberalist system. You know, it's an inevitable result of both liberalism and the multicultural paradigm. Now, we talk a lot on the channel about how the liberal system has a very effective defense mechanism. It accuses anybody of criticizing it as being full of hate. And it's very good for bringing in the average person, the normies as they're known, because what average person wants to align themselves with, quote, hatred? Yet, of course, few actually bother to question whether criticisms of the liberal system are actually hateful or not. Of course, you can find some nutcase, and The Guardian and the BBC are more than happy to show you that person. But what about the increasing amount of people who are looking at Britain and thinking something's fundamentally wrong here? Are they just motivated by hatred? I don't really think they are. That's also why I advise against angry responses. I know that's not very popular with many people, but I believe anger very rarely leads to positive outcomes. Now, this is for two main reasons. The first one, which I'm exploring more on the Substack link below if you're interested, is because I believe the peace of the spirit overcomes the noise of the world. It allows you to see things as they actually are without getting trapped in your emotions, where you tend to get manipulated. And secondly, anger is exactly what the liberalist system wants. It wants to point its finger at you and say, see, I told you these people are all absolutely nuts and full of hate. In time, this means that the key talking points which could undermine the liberalist system get all too easily ignored. Points such as how multiculturalism will inevitably lead to tyranny, how it's a front for the global economic elite, how it destroys and undermines the divine value of culture, not just in England, Britain or Europe, but all cultures, which is quite ironic given their rhetoric. But to understand why multiculturalism does slip inevitably into tyranny, we have to understand the underlying assumptions of its mother ideology, that being liberalism. Now, I'm going to oversimplify things here for the interests of time, but a basic difference between a traditionalist and a liberal worldview is that in the traditionalist conception there is hierarchy. That's natural, that's okay, that's to be expected. The liberalist conception tends to see hierarchies as suspect, normally as forms of oppression. To them, the most important thing is the freedom of the individual. Those individuals also have a blank slate within, meaning they're all equal. Therefore, the differences in status you see between people in the external world in the liberalist understanding are there because of differing forms of power and oppression. Of course, that leads to the classic left-wing arguments such as classism, but more recently racism and sexism and so on. Now, I'm not saying here that classism or sexism or racism can never be a dimension in the development of the social order. I'm saying that the liberal system sees them as the only explanation of the social order. That is the natural end result of blank slatism, which more recently has metastasized into wokeism and given us all of these crazy extreme beliefs such as this.
Generally speaking, are men physically stronger than women?
In my personal encounters, I've met more strong women than I've met strong men.
Now, obviously, the liberal ideology has taken this girl far, far away from basic biological reality. Of course, you can find a strong woman somewhere, but on balance, men are much stronger than women. Yet the interesting thing here is, despite this girl going way off piste into quite extreme beliefs, she will believe that she has the rational, kind and, quote, equal belief, and people that disagree with her are extreme. Yet the problem for this girl and other liberal ideologues, which is basically the whole elite of the Western world, or at least it was until Donald Trump came in, is that physical inequalities are real. That means that what she's labelling as extreme and oppressive is basically just reality. Now, this explains why the classic right-wing points that men are distinct from women, that cultures are sometimes preferable to other ones, that there could be differences between differing groups and so on, are so controversial to the liberal system. Now, this explains the dynamic, but it doesn't explain why they get so upset, aggressive, and even tyrannical about enforcing their views. Now, to understand this, we have to see that liberalism isn't just a political ideology, but actually a bastardized form of Christianity. It's essentially a pseudo-religion. Now, Christianity, as in traditional Christianity properly understood, has quite a sophisticated way of dealing with the physical inequalities and unfairness of the world. You can see this in the way the Bible treats issues such as slavery. Now, in our modernist mind, in the liberal mind, we look at the Bible and think, how can it justify slavery? This is just evil. That's an argument you get a lot, of course, in atheist Christian circles. However, the Bible isn't saying that slavery is good. In fact, quite the opposite. What it's saying is that physical inequality is a dynamic that you can't escape in the human world. This is, of course, why communism fails. You just can't enforce total equality on the physical plane. It's impossible, and if you try, you'll create utter destruction. However, the Christian religion says that what we have to do is recognize that we're monitored by God, that's our soul is monitored to ensure how we behave wherever we find ourselves on a given hierarchy. Essentially, Christianity is saying that we must deal with the world as we find it, but then answer it with compassion, justice, wisdom, love, and truth. However, with the Enlightenment, we started to question the spiritual dimension of life. We started to think it doesn't really exist, it's just airy-fairy nonsense, and the hierarchies it creates in the external world to create order need to be destroyed so we can find a deeper form of equality. Of course, as we've found over the past couple of hundred years, when you remove that dynamic, what you create is ideologies, things that explain the world for us: communism, fascism, socialism, modernism, Nietzsche's will to power, and so on. Now, in a bid to remove the hierarchies of the spiritual order of old and the ideologies of modernity, the West settled on the liberal system. This had neither the spiritual dimension of old nor the collective dimensions of the ideologies. In fact, the core focus of the liberal system was the individual and the blank slatism therein. Yet given man as a mythological animal who will create good and evil wherever he is, essentially liberalism took on the prior Christian energy and made the sanctity of the individual and equality sacrosanct. This is why when you offend the liberal order today, you're not just wrong in their eyes, you're not just hateful, you are a sinner. Now, once you understand this dynamic, you see why liberals will always welcome mass immigration and multiculturalism. After all, everybody's exactly the same, whether you've been here 3 years or 300 years. On top of that, every culture is exactly the same, whether it's the historic culture of Great Britain or whether it's the culture of Timbuktu. However, if you're at one with your tradition, you can see that mass immigration and multiculturalism, by their very nature, undermine your country, undermine your culture, undermine your history. It's nothing to do with hatred at all, it's just a matter of fact. Yet because liberal modernity doesn't understand the spiritual dimension of life, it can only conceptualize it as hate. As I've said before, I have a great interest in comparative mythology and Vedic philosophy of the Hindus and Sufism of Islam. Now, while I can take interest in and learn from these cultures, I don't think it's wise that everybody comes to the UK and all the cultures compete. Just in the same way I can have friends from different backgrounds, but don't want all of them to come and live with me in my house. This is exactly what the liberal system has done in Western nations. It's brought all sorts of people here, and if there are any inequalities following the logic of its own ideology, they can only be explained by oppression, and these inequalities must be ironed out by force. And this brings us to where we are now. If people are concerned there's been a cover-up around Pakistani Muslim grooming gangs, then you're just a far-right racist peddling conspiracy theories. If you're concerned about black youths stabbing each other in crazy numbers in London, you're just a racist because these people have been oppressed by you. Similarly, if you're concerned about the amount of Islamic terror attacks, they'll just broaden the definition of terrorism to make it look more equal. And this is how multiculturalism leads to tyranny. Differences between cultures and genders can only be framed as oppression, and therefore the state always has to step in to limit what can be said to try and enforce equality. But the inequality remains, so they do more and more and more until eventually people are censored so much they can't even criticise the system. So we are now living through a sort of cultural communism. As Karl Marx ironically stated, history repeats itself, first as tragedy, second as farce. First we had class communism, now we've got this sort of cultural communism. As Alexander Solzhenitsyn, a dissident in the Soviet system, stated, "We know that they are lying, they know that they are lying, they even know that we know they are lying. We also know that they know we know they are lying too. They of course know that we certainly know, they know we know they are lying too as well. But they are still lying. In our country, the lie has become not just moral category, but the pillar industry of this country." Yet the reason our liberal overlords lie isn't just because they're evil, as many people think. It's very similar to the communist system. It's because many of them are something worse than evil, and that's true believers. They really believe if they keep hammering this supposed equality stuff, it's going to lead to a better world. Of course, as the famous saying goes, the road to hell is paved with good intentions. While there are evil people out there and others that just want to see the world burn, most of the time such systems are kept moving by useful idiots who really do believe they're creating a better world. That's why they continue it for so very long. That's why they have to conceptualize their opponents as hateful to make them believe that they are the just and good ones. It's why they want to censor opinions which criticize them. Of course, they don't realize that they are the ones creating this dystopia of horror that we're stepping into. Of course, these are just my thoughts. A substats link down below if you do want more from me. I know it was a bit of a heavier video this time, but I wanted to dive deeply into the structures that control us in this day and age. Do let me know your thoughts down below. Do consider subscribing to the channel if you're new.